Hello, I am Andrea, an official SAT tutor at MMT Prep, and in this video I will be explaining the answers for the first reading passage of the College Board's official practice test number 1. As always, this is a fiction passage. When actually taking the test, it is best to do the reading passages in order from easiest or fastest to hardest or slowest. And the fiction actually usually comes towards the end, the last or second to last. But for the sake of these videos, we will just do them in order, and so the fiction is going to be first. We are going to go through and read the passage together and then review the questions with their right answers and why those are the only possible right answers afterwards. As we go along, I'll be giving strategies, things that you can skip, things that you should focus on or watch out for when you're doing future reading tests yourself. So, for reading fiction, the first thing we're going to want to do is to read the blurb. This passage is from Lydia Minatoya, The Strangeness of Beauty, 1999. The setting is Japan in 1920. Chie and her daughter Naomi are members of the House of Fuji, a noble family. So we have the title and author and everything. Those aren't as interesting unless I happen to know them externally. We get the date, the publication, 1999, which can be helpful, especially if it's super old. I just get into that mindset of like, oh, this is going to be a little bit harder. And then we also get the setting, really important. Japan, 1920. Okay, so I want to make sure I have that in my head. And then major characters, Chie and Naomi. I'm going to actually make a note for myself of who these two people are. So C is the mom and N is the daughter. Doing this kind of note-taking, it seems like it takes extra time, but it's really, really helpful and clarifying when you're taking the test yourself. Even if it's not a strategy you use every time, it's a good one to have in case you come across a reading passage that is particularly difficult or has just a lot of characters. That writing down their initials, who they are, is a really, really good way to keep track of everyone. So now that I know where I am, who I'm talking about, I'm going to actually look at the passage. Because it's a fiction passage, not a nonfiction passage, I'm not able to skim it. However, there is a strategy I can use. It's optional, but it can help get my mind into kind of the SAT reading mode. Because the thing with a fiction passage is we don't want to slip into that like, oh, it's story time, and like, oh, it's super interesting, I'm just gonna like read it, you know? Because we're always looking and trying to think what questions would be and what we're looking for the actual test. There's always only one right answer. Okay, so to get into that mindset, I'm going to focus on the place that often kind of gets at the main idea or theme of the passage, and that is the end, usually the last paragraph, because the end of this one is all dialogue. I'm actually going to just choose about 15 lines. Okay, so I'm going to read that first. I won't know exactly what's going on, exactly who we're talking about necessarily, but I will get an idea of what's the significant meaning or big idea getting like attacked or approached behind this, just so I know where to orient when I actually go back to the beginning and read the rest. Mother, Chie heard Naomi's low voice and turned from the door. He has asked you? The sight of Naomi's clear eyes, her dark brows, gave Chie strength. Maybe his hopes were preposterous. Where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine! He thinks he can marry the Fuji heir and take her to America all in the snap of his fingers. Chie waited for Naomi's ripe laughter. Naomi was silent. She stood a full half-minute looking straight into Chie's eyes. Finally, she spoke. I met him at my literary meeting. Naomi turned to go back into the house, then stopped. Mother? Yes, I mean to have him. Okay, so right away we know it's going to be about marriage. And we're lucky enough to actually know who our characters are. And so C, not wanting this marriage, right? The mom's like, hey, this is ridiculous. But N is like, this is going to happen. So that's instantly a big conflict. I know where it's all going to end up. With that in my mind, I'm going to go back to the very beginning and just go through paragraph by paragraph, make sure I know big characters, big events, and any important setting details or changes. Less important details I can kind of skim over. It's not the same process as skimming for the nonfiction section, but I will mention things that are less important that when reading on your own, you might not have to read. So, paragraph by paragraph, the first paragraph. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would Chie have been more receptive? So, with this paragraph, right away, we get new character. I'm going to make a little note for myself that this character exists. I'm looking for who exactly they are. Even if you aren't taking notes of your characters, you want to have that question in your head. Who is this person who I'm suddenly introduced to? Okay, I'm also going to take a note for myself because it is the introduction, often an important, slightly more important paragraph of what was in here. And I'm just going to say it was like a little debate. It was a debate with himself, really. You can make a note however you would best remember it. It's not super important that it's pretty. It doesn't have to be super in-depth. It's just something so that when you glance back through, you'll know where to find what information. So now let's move on to the second paragraph. He came on a winter's eve. He pounded on the door while a cold rain beat on the shuttered veranda, so at first Chie thought him only the wind. The maid knew better. Chie heard her soft, scuttling footsteps, the creak of the door, then the maid brought a calling card to the drawing room for Chie. So, key thing in this paragraph, it's winter's eve, more setting details, right? And the main action is he pounded on the door. It's raining. Most of the other details are kind of minor. Maid's running around. She's interested. But those are secondary. Things to focus on. Winter's eve, rain, he pounded on the door. Next paragraph. Chie was reluctant to go to her guest. Perhaps she was feeling too cozy. She and Naomi were reading at a low table set atop a charcoal brazier. A thick quilt spread over the sides of the table so their legs were tucked inside with the heat. So this paragraph, you can really tell some information is more important than others. And this often happens in fiction where you'll have kind of a bigger claim that's being supported by details. So in this case, the claim is she was feeling too cozy, right? She didn't really want to go. She was reluctant to go because she was feeling too cozy. And then the coziness is the rest of the paragraph, the details. I don't really need to focus on those. Next paragraph, who is it at this hour in this weather? Chie questioned as she picked the name card off the maid's lacquer tray. Shinoda Akira, Kobe Dental College. Okay, so we get a little more information about Akira. Not super important. Naomi recognized the name. Chie heard a soft intake of air. Okay, so this is maybe foreshadowing. I don't know exactly what it means yet. I think you should go, said Naomi, again, maybe hinting she's very invested in this interaction. I'm not sure where it's going to lead. So, next paragraph, Akira was waiting in the entry. He was in his early 20s, slim and serious, wearing the black military-style uniform of a student. As he bowed, his hands hanging straight down, a black cap in one, a yellow oil paper umbrella in the other, Chie glanced beyond him. In the glistening surface of the courtyard's rain-drenched paving stones, she saw his reflection like a dark double. Okay, so we have, again, main action. Akira was waiting. And then we have a whole description of Akira. That's most of the paragraph. Not as important. Maybe I want to highlight he was a student. A lot of the other details are secondary. So let's keep reading. Madame, said Akira, forgive my disruption, but I come with a matter of urgency. His voice was soft, refined. He straightened and stole a deferential peek at her face. In the dim light, his eyes shone with sincerity. Chie felt herself starting to like him. Okay? And I'm kind of reading a little bit faster, you might hear, and that's because I can tell this is small talk, right? And when we have small talk in normal life, usually not super important. In a fiction piece, definitely not as important. So I'm kind of looking for the next important thing that's going to happen or going to be said. Come inside. Get out of this nasty night. Surely your business can wait for a moment or two. I don't want to trouble you. Normally I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. I have an opportunity to go to America as dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. Okay, so there, just after 40, again, we have slightly more important details. He has an opportunity to go to America. This is why he is coming to see her. Congratulations, Chie said with amusement. That is an opportunity, I'm sure, but how am I involved? Even noting Naomi's breathless reaction to the name card, Chie had no idea. Akira's message, delivered like a formal speech, filled her with maternal amusement. Okay? The rest of the paragraph is going to describe that maternal amusement. But before I get there, I just want to note that even noting Naomi's breathless reaction, again, this is foreshadowing and really highlighting Naomi's investment in Akira. And in light of the ending, I might make an educated guess that he's the person that Naomi was talking about. Not totally sure, but that's kind of as a possibility in the back of my head. The more you can try and be making connections like that as you're reading, the more engaged you'll be with the reading and the faster you'll be able to understand what's going on, and generally the more accurately you'll ultimately answer the questions because of that greater understanding. So now I'm going to finish the paragraph from line 49. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind? That's how she viewed him as a child. Okay, so she sees him as a child. He's respectful. I can keep going. It was how she viewed Naomi. Even though Naomi was 18, training endlessly in the arts needed to make a good marriage, Chie had made no effort to find her a husband. Okay, so again, we get the marriage here. Like, oh, I think I have a good guess where this is going. Akira's going to be involved in the marriage situation, but I'm not sure yet. Keep reading. Akira blushed. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. And there we go. Indeed, he is asking to marry her daughter. Okay, so this is the key main thing. All this small talk and dialogue and knocking on the doors leading up to this point, he's asking to marry Naomi. Okay. Suddenly, Chie felt the dampness of the night. As we know from the ending, she's less into this idea. She's suddenly all cold and like, oh, this is horrible, right? And her response, does Naomi know anything of your ambitions? Right? Not eager. So then the next paragraph is going to be Akira again. We have an understanding. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I ask directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Either method comes down to the same thing, a matter of parental approval. If you give your consent, I become Naomi's Yoshi. We'll live in the house of Fuji. Without your consent, I'll go to America to secure a new home for my bride. Okay? So again, this is a little more important. He's saying, essentially, hey, I want to marry your daughter. If you say yes, that's great. We'll hang out in your house. We'll live in Japan. We'll be nobles. If you say no, I'm going to take her away to America. So he's not totally asking. He's just asking if she'll give her consent and if they should stay in Japan or not. So that's an important detail to get. I'm going to keep reading. Eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. Abruptly, his voice turned gentle. I see I've startled you. My humble apologies. I'll take no more of your evening. My address is on my card. If you don't wish to contact me, I'll reapproach you in 2 weeks' time. Until then, good night. Okay? So this is him saying bye. Less important again. He bowed and left, taking her ease with effortless grace like a cat making off with a fish. Mother, Chie heard Naomi's low voice and turned from the door. He's asked you? Okay? So again, the ending where Chie doesn't want the marriage, Naomi's like, hey, I mean to have him. That's the very, very final line. Super important. So, for the full fiction passage, I didn't read it all in order, but I ended up reading all of it. And I want to make sure that I understand it all before even looking at the questions. This is maybe the best thing you can do to improve your reading section scores. It's like 1-2 seconds, and it means that you'll know both the main ideas, all the main ideas and progression of the passage right at the top of your head, and also that you'll know where to find specific information on those detailed questions that will come later. So I'm just going to go through overall, first column, second column, what's going on. Okay, so at the very beginning, Akira came directly, and he broke all the tradition, right? He wasn't using the traditional means, and so he's like, is that why Chie didn't want to have the marriage? Right? He's debating about this situation. And then we go back to the beginning of the story. He came on a winter's eve, right? He's knocking on the door. It's raining. And Chie's like, I don't really want to go. It's too cozy. But then she goes eventually, right? And Akira was waiting. He's a student. They have some small talk down here. And then he's like, hey, I have an opportunity to go to America. And she's like, what does this have to do with me? And some good foreshadowing, lots of foreshadowing. And then we get down. Finally, yes, he wants to marry her daughter, right? We kind of had an idea of that before, but this is where he says it. And then he's like, hey, I'm going to marry your daughter whether or not you want me to. It's just whether or not I'm going to stay, right? And then he leaves here. And then we have the whole conversation down at the bottom where Chie is like, this is ridiculous. And Naomi's like, no, I'm going to have him. So have it super clear in my mind. I am now ready to move on to answering my questions. Okay? So, number 1, which choice best describe what happens in the passage? As I go through this, I'm going to try and mark my answer choices. Anytime I see something that's definitively wrong, I'm going to cross it out. It's actually helpful to mark the specific word that makes it wrong so that you know what your thinking was if you come back and check it, and also so you feel more confident as you move forward. So I'm going to do that, going through each of these. Number 1A, one character argues with another character who intrudes on her home. Okay, argues, there's not really an argument. I'm going to say no to that one. B, one character receives a surprising request from another character. Maybe. C, one character reminisces about choices she has made over the years. She's not reminiscing. Even if you don't have the vocab word, there's only one character, so it can't be that. D, one character criticizes another character for pursuing an unexpected course of action. No one's really exactly criticizing. It's not the main arc. And so I'd say the best thing, it's definitely not an argument, is going to be receiving a surprising request, right? The request for marriage was surprising. So the answer for 1 will be B. 2, which choice best describes the developmental pattern of the passage? A careful analysis of a traditional practice. It's not a careful analysis. B, a detailed depiction of a meaningful encounter. Maybe. C, a definitive response to a series of questions. We never get the definitive response, so it can't be that. D, a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. It's not cheerful. It's not going to be that. So, a detailed depiction of a meaningful encounter. Asking for marriage is definitely a meaningful encounter. I'm going to choose that. B for number 2. Number 3 is a vocab question. For this kind of question, the best thing to do is to go back and actually read the full sentence. So, I'm going to look at line 1 first and look for directly. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Okay, it's there, but it's a really short sentence. I'm not 100% sure what they're saying, and I have a second line number. So I'm going to go to 65 and see if that's more helpful. I ask directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Okay, so the key thing here is there is no go-between, right? That does not exist. So directly means without a go-between. I have made that definition for myself. That's the best step, the first thing you want to do for a vocab problem, so you don't get tricked and so you'll recognize the right answer. So with that in my mind, no go-between, I'm going to check my possible answers. Frankly, doesn't mean with no go-between. It might be right. More broadly, I'm not sure. Confidently, definitely not. Without mediation, maybe, I'm not sure. Without kind of fits. D, with precision, nope. Between frankly and without mediation, I know the key thing is the go-between. It's vocab and context. I'm going to eliminate frankly and choose without mediation because frankly doesn't really mean without a go-between. And mediation actually does mean exactly that someone is going between two people. So the answer will be C. For number 4, there's a key thing to notice. Okay, so if we scroll down, we can see 4 is actually a pair with 5. You want to always be looking out for these, okay? So make sure you see that. Take the time to turn the page and know that because these kind of pair problems go faster when you do them together. So let's look at the question for 4. Which reaction does Akira most fear from Chie? So we have to find Akira fearing something from Chie. I'm going to now look at my options for 5 and see if they talk about Akira's fear about Chie. So first, 33, from his voice. Okay, his voice was soft, refined. Definitely nothing informative about a possible fear or reaction. Next one, B, 4951. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind. Okay, so this is actually Chie speaking. So this is not a fear that Akira has. Let's look at C, 6364, from Please. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. Okay, so that's a fear, right? That he'd be judged. Maybe. I'm not totally sure. I'm going to check the last one, D, 7172, from Eager. Eager to make his point, he'd be looking her full in the face. Okay, so that's what he's eager to do. It doesn't really have a fear, though, is one thing. The other thing is it's not the main point. I know from the very beginning, it's a lot about tradition. That's an ongoing concern. So the unseemliness of the proposal goes back to that. It seems more significant. I'm going to choose C. He's afraid that she will judge the unseemliness of the proposal. And then I have to find an answer for 4 that will match that. So for A is that he will consider this proposal inappropriate, which is exactly what I was looking for. I'm going to choose that. I can check the other ones. She will mistake his earnestness for immaturity. So that would be a false pair with the 49 to 51, which is Chie thinking he's like a child. Doesn't match. C, she will consider his unscheduled visit an imposition. That's really minor, not the main concern. D, she will underestimate the sincerity of his emotions. That is a false answer with D down here, which I actually ended up eliminating because it's less important than C. So I'm going to say this is also less important. The main thing is about tradition, right? She will consider his proposal inappropriate. So having finished 4 and 5 together, I'm now ready to move on to 6. In the passage, Akira addresses Chie with, and this is specific words. Part of it is basic understanding of how Akira is addressing Chie. Part of it, though, is also vocabulary. So if I don't know a word, I'm going to try and work around it as best as possible and use their pairs of words, right? Affection and love. Use the pair to try and get a feel for what's in that answer. So A, affection but not genuine love. He doesn't really have any explicit affection for her. I'm probably going to say no. B, objectivity but not complete impartiality. Objectivity is like distance. That doesn't really match. He's invested because he wants to marry her daughter, right? C, amusement but not mocking disparagement. No real amusement. Can eliminate that. D, respect but not utter deference. Even if I don't know what deference means, respect is definitely something that keeps coming up. I'm going to choose D as the right answer for number 6. Okay, so moving on. Number 7, the main purpose of the first paragraph is to describe a culture, criticize a tradition, question a suggestion, analyze a reaction. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is to actually reread that first paragraph. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? Okay. So it's all about him having this debate of like, oh, why didn't she want me to marry her daughter, right? And maybe it's because he broke the tradition. I want to take the time to make sure I've understood that for myself before I look at my answers. So now I'm ready. I'm going to look at the answers for number 7. A, describe a culture. They're not exactly describing anything. It's lots of questions. So I guess say not A. B, criticize a tradition. He's not really criticizing anything. He's questioning it. C, question a suggestion. There's questions. So maybe that, right? I don't know if I have a suggestion though. Let's look at D. Analyze a reaction. Okay, so it's all about would Chie have done something different if he'd acted differently. So he is definitely analyzing Chie's reaction. I'm going to say that's better than questioning a suggestion. Even though they are questions, there isn't exactly a suggestion. So I'm going to eliminate C. So for 8, as used in line 2, form most nearly means. Again, vocabulary, we want to read that sentence. Had he followed form? Right? And we know, we just read this, that it's all about him doing the traditional thing, him following tradition. So I'm going to make for myself the word tradition in place of form. And now I'm going to look at my answer choices for 8 and see if I find one that matches tradition. Appearance, no. Custom, maybe. Structure, definitely not. Nature, definitely not. I'm going to go for custom. It is the same as tradition. I'm just going to check it in the sentence. Had he followed custom, would she have been more receptive? Work, sounds good. I'm ready to keep going. 9, why does Akira say his meeting with Chie is a matter of urgency? Okay, so again, a key thing to notice is that 9 and 10 are working together. We can use that to our advantage, right? So we're looking for why it is a matter of urgency. I'm going to go through the quotes. 39, I don't want to trouble you. Normally I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. Oh, 39 ends, I don't want to trouble you, right here. It is before the point where he says why. So not 39. 39 to 42, this is where it gets into normally I would approach more properly, but I've received word of a position. I have an opportunity to go to America as dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. Okay, so this is exactly why he's approaching her in the way that he is. I'm going to say that that looks very, very right. I can check the last two, 58, 59. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. That's why he came, right? But we're looking for why it is urgent. And that's not why it's urgent, it's why he came. 72, 73. I see I've startled you. My humble apologies. Oh, I see I've startled you. Again, super basic observation, not really the reason for the urgency. B is by far the best choice. He's an opportunity to go to America. And then I'm going to look for an answer to 9 that would match that. So A, he fears that his own parents will disapprove of Naomi. Not related. B, he worries that Naomi will reject him. Also not related. C, he has been offered an attractive job in another country. Sounds about right. I'm going to circle it, just check D. He knows that she is unaware of his feelings for Naomi. That's not the reason for the urgency, right? It's just a fact. So it's going to be C for 9 matched with B as evidence for 10. So I've now completed the full fiction section. If there were any questions that were particularly hard, you can go back through the video, find those answers, take the time to sit down and think about why you made the choices you made before, why they'd be wrong, and how you can make a better choice in the future.